Hello and welcome to another episode of Tory Talks. I'm Sam. This is...
Yeah, hi, I'm Ian. Happy New Year.
Work out what side it was. Happy New Year. And it's been a while.
Yes, it has. I don't know how long it has, but we've had Christmas and New Year. Oh, hold on. Sorry, my phone wasn't on silent. We've had Christmas and New Year since then, although both of them do seem to have been a bit of a damp squib. But yeah, it's been a while, but we're back.
We are back, and we're going to be back properly this time. The thing is, it was just getting a bit like, let's not talk about the pandemic. Let's not talk about the pandemic. And it's like consuming us all. So we're like, let's have a break. Well, from my perspective, it's let's have
well,
a
yeah,
break.
it's a little bit because as well, one of the issues you have, obviously, is that the pandemic has taken over a lot of the normal politics that we would talk about on a day-to-day basis. And I think, in all honesty, people are a little bit pandemicked out. So why don't we make this the last mention of the pandemic or COVID during the whole of this episode, please? And what is this episode going to be about, Mrs. Murray?
We're going to talk about something we're both addicted to, and that is social media. But we're going to talk about the recent events that are happening that has prompted us to have a discussion generally about social media and the big giants that are in charge of things and the puppet masters behind Twitter and Facebook. And so this subject has obviously come up because the big man himself has been banned from everything, including Pinterest. So he can't even look at DIY how to make curtains anymore because the big giants have said, we are not having Trump as part of our platforms anymore. So we thought it was worth talking about whether that's right or wrong to ban an ex-president from...
And are we also going to hit on the something that's been on social media for the last 24 hours, food parcels and free school meals?
If we've got time.
Okay, so obviously for those, I'm guessing that if people are watching this on a podcast, then they're almost definitely active on social media. But for anybody that has been living, obviously we've had the issue in the US of the storming of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., and then certain social media platforms completely blaming that, obviously, on the president, and for that reason, and reasons given such as the way he controls himself, the words he uses on social media, they've removed him from the platform. Not only have they removed him from the platform, it does seem to me to be lots of accounts from right-wing, centre-right politicians, commentators, normal people in the street also seem to have been obliterated from the social media world. What do you think?
I have concerns, and I've had concerns for a while when they started doing the whole fact check-in Trump. And obviously these big social media companies seem to have an awful lot of influence and power. It's interesting because I think that because they're private, they should have the right to pick and choose who's on their platforms. But I think it's a dangerous road to go down where we just allow something like this to happen because of someone's political agenda, when we know, because I've spoken quite a lot about it, that the likes of Twitter and Facebook will allow videos of child abuse, will allow horrendous accounts that go consistently abuse people. You know what I've received, and do absolutely nothing about it. But someone who is right wing can be censored in this way, and they've obviously been waiting for an excuse to do this for an awful long time because of locking the accounts and so on and so forth. And I just think it's just, as much as I am not going to say they shouldn't be allowed to do it, I don't like the fact that they have done it.
I think it's a very strange one, especially for a Conservative, because, you know, being a Conservative, I'm not really in the it doesn't really sit very comfortably for me about telling private businesses how they should and can operate.
Yeah.
So in a way, I'm very much thinking, well, do you know what? It's their platform. They've written it. It's up to them who they allow on there or not. And if that certainly means that they're not allowing a certain section of society that may, in their opinion, have done something, is that up to them? Then yes, it is. But I think one of the real important distinctions, and this is something that kind of gets lost in the argument, because I think this is one of those tribal arguments where most people have decided what side they're going to support before they even hear the argument. They're either going to be pro or anti-Trump. And there aren't many people that sit on the fence with this subject. But one of the most important things, I think, is the way that these large social media companies are actually placed in the law. So what I mean by that is that at the moment, they're not publishers. They're not seen to be publishers of content. So it's not like a newspaper where if there's a report in a newspaper by a certain journalist and they use language that might be defamatory or libelous or whatever, they can get sued in court, they can get taken to court, all kinds of actions can be taken. Social media companies have got the beauty of being of not being covered by those rules because of the way they've kind of market themselves as being a platform for people to air their views rather than a publisher of their content. Now, if they're going to censor accounts because of politics, which it does look like they are, then that almost makes them a publisher of content. And if they are a publisher of content, it would almost, well, if they were ever deemed to be a publisher of content, it would almost shut them down overnight, I'm guessing, because they would be then responsible for every single thing that every single person posted. Now, you and I are both quite active on Twitter. You and I both see worst cases of vile language and abuse on Twitter every single day than anything that they're alleging that Trump has done. What I'm saying is, if you want to be a platform that has the choice over who is on and who is allowed to spout their views, then you should obviously follow the same rules as other printed media. So I think I'm not too sure where long term this is actually heading. I can fully understand, you know, if they thought Donald Trump incited violence and deaths happened because of this violence, then I think regardless of whether they're a publisher of content or not, they have the right to take him off their platform.
Yeah.
But I think if they're going to do that, then there needs to be rules and regulations, which there already are on Twitter. Now, obviously, most people will know I'm not anti-Trump, or haven't certainly been up to this point. I think I'd feel a lot more comfortable if I was shown what rules he'd actually violated. If I could see that he'd actually violated some of the rules that are in the terms and conditions that most of us have never read, then it's our own fault we haven't read them, we've broken those rules, it's our own fault we're suspended, kind of thing. And you have to say that. We're all adults, we'll all have choice over what we do and what we say. But I think I'm right in saying that it's very difficult to actually pinpoint anything Trump said that could 100% be used as a look that caused this violence, that caused this rioting, that caused this looting. And my final thought for the moment on this is that this would probably appear to be less political if there was more instances of these social media companies banning other people for whatever they've stated online. Now, last year, obviously, we had all the BLM riots and the Antifa riots. So they were far, in the States. We had months of several major cities being looted, burned, robbed. I think dozens of people were murdered on both sides. There was violence all over. And, we've all seen the videos on social media of left-wing political commentators, left-wing politicians, just generally people with a left-leaning political persuasion, saying some goddamn awful things on social media about lynching people and supporting the violence, and that people had a right to do it. And there was no uproar. There was no bannings. There was nobody held accountable for any of this. And all I would like to see, because I don't want to be tribal with this, what I want to see is some semblance of a balance.
Yeah, some
And then I think,
consistency.
sorry, after you.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, I was just agreeing. Yeah, some consistency with who they're going to ban, because it is, like you say, we've seen some awful stuff. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just agreeing with you. Yeah, we saw when Boris was in hospital, there were people with rather large platforms hoping he would die and making it very public that he would die. Coming, in the States, the last election, there were people on the other side claiming that there was electoral fraud and how they were cheated and things like that. So there's been a repetition of, what Trump is doing now to a degree, or has done, is almost word for word the same as what the other side did when he won. So yeah, it needs to be consistency. There is some horrendous stuff on that platform that probably should go, but it only appears to be the right wingers that are the ones that are booted. But it's gone further than that. So it's like now the giants are making a decision on what platforms they're going to agree. I mean, Parlour, I went on it just to see what it was about. I couldn't use it.
So obviously, I think it's quite important that do you explain what Parlour is? You have to bear in mind that not everybody is a Twitter addict.
Well, Parlour was, so when Parlour was supposed to be like an alternative for Twitter. So when all the monitoring and the censorship and started, people were encouraged, if you were right wing or centre right, to go onto Parlour, because that would be, kind of whatever. So I thought I would go over to that and see what the app was like. I'm obviously interested in social media and I advise on social media. I went over there. It was frankly unusable. So I've got hardly any experience of what the actual content was and who was on there, because I literally couldn't use it. And the problem is you then can close your account. But that's now gone. So people that decided to go on there to be whatever echo chamber they wanted to be there, just like any echo chamber that you are on Twitter sometimes, they haven't been given that choice because Google have decided to take that off, that platform off. And as far as I can see, there has been no justification of it, and it's a rolling effect from, okay, let's continue with this censorship of the right, and I have concerns over it.
So what do you think? And I've got my ideas, but what do you think this actually does? Censoring a large group of people. Bear in mind, whether you believe there was electoral fraud or not, I believe I'm right in saying that more people voted in this latest US election than has ever voted before. I think, and we have to put this into context, that this happens quite a lot because of obviously population increase. But I believe that Trump, although he lost by a reasonable margin, actually got more votes than most people who win. So we're not talking of a marginalised part of society, are we here? We're talking about quite a large part of society. What do you think the ramifications are of closing down the speech from one side of an argument?
I think all that we've seen in the last, I'm going to say 4 or 5 years, is this constant push of this is how you should think, this is how you should think, this is how you should think, and it comes through the media, it's on social media, you know, everything that is pumped out of the way we should think is rammed down our throats. And it's been so divisive that as the years are going on, people are becoming angrier and angrier, and they're bedding in to their camp. And so we're seeing more and more clashes than I remember seeing. And I think this is only going to have the complete opposite effect to whatever these social media giants or the media, when they're pumping out their stuff, has. Is there's this shift to the left that's forcing people to think that they are, and we're embedding. And instead of talking to each other, it's now, well, no, because we're right and we're morally superior to all of you, and then we're being censored and we're not allowed to have our talk. And all it's doing is causing further division. So all I can see is that the intolerance to each other is just going to grow and grow and grow, because people have been pushed to the limits. Because one side is being given that boost of, yeah, we're right, and the other side is frustrated that, no, we have a voice too.
I think it's quite strange that this has got a lot of similarities with the way Brexit and the whole Brexit referendum played out. On the lead up to obviously the Brexit referendum, Brexiteers were classed as, and if you remember, it almost seems to be, the argument seems to be the people versus the state, the people versus the institutions, as it were. That was very much how a lot of the argument was pitched about Brexit, and that in a similar way, that's what's happening in the US. When Trump first came to power, one of the things, what was it, drain the swamp. And realistically, we didn't use those terms here, drain the swamp, but we did use similar terms to talk about the establishment, as it were. And there is undoubted the fact that establishment were against Brexit, and obviously Brexiteers were vilified on social media, name called, abused, and everything, much the same as the Trump supporters are getting now. Now, whether you believe that's right or wrong. Now, the problem I've got with this is that it seems a very naive thing to do, because I don't think it's that uncommon for when you shut something down or when you close something down that it then goes underground. It can potentially get bigger than what it ever would have done before, and you're almost fueling their own fires, and you're making them bigger. You're giving them this, do you know what, sod you then, we're going to do this anyway type thing. I mean, you could almost say it looks like everything is leading towards or pointing towards there being some kind of clash of something happening at the US Biden's inauguration day. Now, you could turn around and say that it's the social media companies banning Trump that have incited that. In the same way, if you're going to turn around and say that Donald Trump incited last week's violence on the Capitol, if there is violence at the inauguration, you could almost say it was the social media companies, because it's as a direct consequence of trying to shut down debate. Now, that whole term that I've just said there, shut down debate, is something which I'm extremely uncomfortable with, but something which has seemed to be going on. And basically, do you know what? It's what social media has just become. I think it's very important to remember that social media isn't life. Social media isn't the real world, and it doesn't even begin to reflect the real world, although everybody on social media presumes it does. If it did, every country in the world would be run by some left-wing fanatic, and we'd all be eating avocados and hummus all day long. We'd all be vegetarian. We'd all be vegetarian, we'd all be very huggy, and we'd all be have a Greta Thunberg as our profile picture. But it isn't real life. And I think the arguments that you get on social media are sometimes they're so facile. I mean, they're so irritatingly banal and boring and simple, because everybody, it's black, it's white, there's no grey, there's no middle ground. You either like it or you hate it. And we've even got to the stage now where if you don't proclaim that you like something, you're told that you hate it.
Well, this is it. It's like, if you put out "I like apples," that means you hate bananas, you know, and it's just like, and then all of a sudden, if you're in the public eye, then the media runs with, "Well, Councillor Ian Fisher hates bananas because you put out there you like apples." You know, it's that, and also because the media are so lazy with things now, they're so reliant on social media, where there's just that tiny little snippet, and then they run a story from it. And so that's the problem, is social media is so powerful now, because, you know, most of the our local paper run stories of what they've seen on social media. We've got a journalist in our, you know, residents group thing, who run a couple of articles based on our private residents thing, and never asked us any permission of whether they could run it, because they're lazy. Journalism today is lazy, and it's run on social media, which is an echo chamber.
Yeah,
and it's dangerous.
It's a difficult thing, you know. The one thing that I actually hope that comes out of it is that ever since the internet came up, ever since the internet became a thing, ever since it became big, we've been looking for a way to deal with it. We've been looking for a way to manage it, control it, legislate for it. And at the moment, we've given it a very, well, governments around the world have given it a very light touch, and they've almost stepped away from it. Yet, in every other forms of media, whether that be printed, television, or whatever, they're extremely more regulated now than what they ever have been. So on one side, you've got a situation where the media is incredibly controlled. I mean, so, some of these media outlets put on social media things they wouldn't ever dream of putting anywhere near their printed versions, because they know they can get away with it. So I think what this may actually do is actually hasten the debate that needs to be had about how we should be controlling the internet. Obviously, when the internet came about, it was this, oh, look, this is freedom and everybody's got this, and it was all meant to be very lovey-dovey, and everything was supposed to be wonderful on it, and it was, you know, hailed as the greatest thing. But we're all aware that although it has brought many of us lots of hours of, well, lots of additional things that we could have never have dreamed to have had before, it has also been the cause of so many problems and issues and mental health issues and deaths and everything else that we just haven't got our head around how. Now, what was the internet's been a thing really since what, the middle 90s? So we're talking 25 years here. The internet's been a thing. Don't look at me like that and think, oh, has it really? Has it really? Has it really? I'm not that old.
It's just, I wasn't going to say anything, but it's like, because of my age, it's like,
you don't have to say anything, Sam.
You
made the facial expression. I think I joined Facebook in, I can't remember if it was 96 or 97.
Which is, it was called the Facebook then, wasn't it? So I still call it the Facebook now.
It was called, no, I don't call it the Facebook. No, it was called Facebook, I think. But I think we've done it about 97, and before that, you know, I've probably been on the internet since probably 95, 96, something like that. So we're talking 25 years. But in all honesty, in that 25 years, there isn't any government around the world that's got any kind of handle on it whatsoever. Quite illuminating, actually, that I believe the Polish government, and I'm not too sure if this is 100% correct, but they've enacted some law recently that says something along the lines of, if you haven't broken the rules, our internal rules of our laws, then you can't be banned on social media. And if social media companies ban people that haven't broken the laws in that country, then they will take the social media company off their internet, and they won't allow it to broadcast in their country. Now, obviously, we are talking of Poland here that does have a pretty right-wing government. Whether they see that through or not, I don't know. But certainly, there needs to be some kind of debate. It's no, I don't think it's any coincidence that shares in Twitter dropped 4% the first day they traded after them banning Donald Trump. And then it dropped a further 4% the day afterwards. Now, a lot of that isn't because, you know, Trump supporters are dumping their shares or anything like that. It's because business investors are seeing it as, you know, they might very well agree with the decision, but it's because business investors are seeing them almost change their model before their eyes. Gone are the days when anybody could join, anybody could do this, anybody could do that. They're now taking editorial decisions over the content, which means it isn't what it set out to be. So, and we all know that money's the driver of things. So it'll be very interesting to see how this plays out over the coming months as to whether, I mean, Trump is talking of starting a new political party. I think it's called the Patriots Party. You know as well as I do that if you force something to go underground, it'll probably be bigger than what it is. He's also talking of starting up a some kind of social media thing. Well, you know that him and his backers have the money to do it. So this very well could be the start of the internet finally, and social media finally being regulated, which in all honesty, regardless of what side of the political spectrum you're on, in all honesty, should be welcomed by us all.
Yeah, and I agree with you in terms of regulation. I have always said that I'd like anonymous accounts to be banned, and because I think, you know, there needs to be, in terms of legal implications of what people put out there, there needs to be a link to a person to help with the police and so on and so forth. But I'm thinking, we've obviously had a discussion on ironically social media with people who've got a different opinion, who have said, yeah, but there's consequences to your action. So in their eyes, and I'm on the fence with this, so I'm not saying I disagree with that person or I agree with them, but in their eyes is Trump's influence on social media can be argued to have a direct consequence, and that was what happened in Washington. Now, if you take that as being, okay, I can understand, then what would the consequence be of if an elected official or elected representative purposely puts out misinformation to cause distress to the people they're representing? And we know that
are you talking of Councillor Alistair Ross by any chance?
It could be Councillor Alistair Ross. It could be that Dr. Rosanna, whatever, you know. That's it. There's an awful lot of them. But yeah, locally, Councillor Ross, we know that Councillor Glenn Chisholm does it as well. Purposely puts out this information that they know is inaccurate, which could...
Well, and that's what I'm saying. That's the same thing. Now,
what if a mum... But my argument is, what if a mum reads what they're putting out there, is in a situation where they're in despair, and then has a negative consequence on that person's mental health because of what they're putting out there? Does someone's mental health not matter? And so if for Councillor Ross to be chanting out this thing about there's direct consequences for your actions, what should be the direct consequence of his own actions? And that's the problem.
Well, yeah, because obviously the big thing that you've hit on there is that, you know, if you're going to ban people for saying things that might entice people to do something, whether that's good, bad, or whatever, then you've got to do that regardless of how many followers they've got. You know, if I just wrongly influence one person because of a lie that I've told, and that person then does something derogatory or bad to themselves or harmful or whatever, then that's no better or worse than somebody that puts something out there that 100,000 people listen to and 50,000 people turn up somewhere and have a riot. You know, just because it's one person as opposed, and that's where the issue lies, and that goes to the root of everything we've just spoken about, is that regardless of whether you think Trump did something or not, let's say he did. Let's say he incited the riot. Okay. So he incited however many thousand people there were storming the Capitol, probably a couple of thousand people, to do something bad that broke the law. If you're going to ban somebody for that, it needs to be illegal. For social media to survive, it can't be social media's decision. It needs to be removed because there's legislation that makes that illegal, what he's done. In the same way that if Fred, who's got 17 followers and follows 6 people, posts something derogatory or inflammatory or basically a lie, and then one person reacts badly to that, and one person does something which is whatever, then that's the same consequence. And the consequence should be no different whether you've got a blue tick and 6 million followers, or you haven't got a blue tick, you've been on it for 3 days and you've got 6 people and a dog that follow you. It shouldn't make any difference whatsoever. And that's the hypocrisy at the moment of social media. And in a way, it makes me laugh because it's almost like and I'll use the word which some people hate, this woke culture where middle-class people fall over themselves to try and show how woke they actually are and how in touch with their sensibilities they actually are, because they believe that's what people want to hear. But haven't election after election after election, not only in this country but everywhere else in the world, told people that that's not what people want? Do you know, in the long term, because we have these people that preach to us on social media, I know I've gone off the subject a little bit, they preach to us on social media thinking that they own the moral high ground or that the public are behind them, but they're coming from a stance which actually isn't that well supported. And I think I said this to you on a phone call the other day, it may be the best thing for Western society for Joe Biden to have won this election. Because if you saw what he tweeted out yesterday or the day before about how his presidency is going to look after, he basically listed out every single demographic of any kind of country with the exception of white men. He was trying to be ultra woke. He said he was going to look after all those people. Now, do you know what? I think his presidency could be the thing that breaks wokeness around the world, because I think that everybody will see what are the consequences of total wokeness. And I think in the long run that the right have actually won by losing the election to Joe Biden.
Well, we shall have to wait and see, won't we?
4 more years.
I can live another 4 more years of this. It's madness, isn't it? But yeah, I mean, it's just infuriating, and it's infuriating to see the hypocrisy of, oh well, this person should be banned because this happened, but let's all forget all the riots and everything and the Black Lives Matter protests and everything else that followed. Let's just forget about that and how we encouraged people to go to protests during a pandemic and everything that came, because we're just going to blame.
Because let's just remember, what was it now? 6 months ago, I called out Ipswich Borough Council for condoning a protest during a pandemic that was the Black Lives Matter march. Mm-hmm. I even stated it was nothing to do with Black Lives Matter, it's nothing to do with X, Y, and Z, it's everything to do with the march. I got absolutely castigated for it. I got hauled over the coals. I got an actual censure from the council because so many people had complained. And it's bizarre. All I was actually saying was you shouldn't be protesting during a pandemic. Because people presumed it was an anti-BLM stance, which you'd be perfectly entitled to have. You're perfectly entitled to be pro or anti anything. We have freedom of mind. I mean, let's not get on freedom of speech, but we have freedom of mind. We do not have thought control anywhere in the world. If I want to like or hate anything and I keep it in my head, that's totally fine. Whether it's legal or illegal, you can't be prosecuted for having thoughts. But that's almost where we're getting to. I think we've probably overrun our allotted time, so the free school meals will have to wait.
Oh no, I'm gutted.
But but what I do think is that rather than waiting a week for it, let's do another one in a couple of days and put it out there while it's still hot.
Yeah. Why not? Because I'm getting an awful lot of pictures now being sent for what people are getting in their free school meals, and it's very different to what social media is saying they're getting on their free school.
Yeah.
But as ever, it's been a pleasure.
It has been a pleasure. It's been emotional.
Yeah. Thanks for listening to our rant about Trump.